And my name is Li-Ming Stroh. I am the founder and CEO of Master of the World here, and so happy to be here. So happy to see everyone come in. Thank you. I'm going to introduce Tim. Today's show is going to feature Tim, his book, his teachings, his techniques that I myself have a book. It's actually in my car, Tim, because I was reading it again last night in preparation for today.
Oh my
Just
goodness.
realized I left it in my car, but mine is tabbed and highlighted.
Wow.
So, Tim, I wanted to introduce you to everyone. Tim Gaiser.
Okay, well, thanks, Lee Bang. Everybody, welcome to today's session. Yeah, Lee Ming and I talked about this. There's a lot of information that I'm going to cover quickly. But I want you to, it's okay. Don't worry. There's no freaking out in wine like there's no crying in baseball, okay? Because we're recording this. All the things we're going to talk about today are in my book. They're also on my blog, tgaiser.com/blog. In fact, the interesting thing about my blog, and you should take a look because the last two posts are about my internal strategies for how I look at and smell wine. It literally is, especially the one about smelling, is what I do internally when I make sense out of a glass of wine. Okay, so we've got 6 wines to taste. These are really good for all of you who are dangerously excited about exams, and I know you're out there. All 6 of these wines are testable, and I chose them on purpose for that, okay? But also, as this slide points out, we're going to really focus on 3 different strategies from my book. And the strategies are, I think, the most important ones if you're taking a blind tasting exam or you're, just blind tasting for practice. Okay, next slide, Li Ming, please. And so these 3 strategies, the first is cause and effect. And that's very simply why. It answers the question of why wine looks the way it does, smells the way it does, tastes the way it does. Then putting all those pieces together. So the first thing you got to do, and it's going to come up in a slide in a second, you have to learn a tasting grid. And it could be the WSET grid. It could be the Quartz MS grid. Could be OSI's, the International Sommelier Organization's grid. You got to memorize a grid. And then beyond that, the second phase of learning a grid is literally knowing why all the things are the way they are. Okay. Next up, I think could be the most important thing for wine students, certainly for professionals, and that's impact compounds. So that's a subset of about 12 to 15 aromas and flavors that we as professionals, we have to own them because that's how we recognize varietals in classic wines. And then finally, assessing structural levels. That's another thing that, wine professionals have to be good at. You have to be rock solid, is that you really have to precisely gauge how much alcohol, how much acidity, how much tannin, how much phenolic bitterness, and even how much residual sugar could be in a wine. All right, next slide, please. All right, so just a little bit about the book. So Message in the Bottle, and I have to give my good friend Amy Albert, she's a dear friend. She was my editor at Fine Cooking Magazine for over 10 years, and she named the book. And I sent her a bottle of champagne for it, don't worry. Always reward those who help you. So the good news is that Sting's attorney hasn't contacted me yet, knock on wood. And I think he would like the book because he owns a wine estate in Tuscany, right? And okay, the book took over 10 years to write, but at the same time, the earliest chapters were written in 2005. So it's something that I cogitated on for a long, long time. It's also the product of me going way back over 30 years, 35 years, not being good at tasting and really struggling with it, and really it being a long slog for me to figure out the process and how to do it, how at least my internal mechanizations did tasting, okay? And so that's really, for me, a lot of this book is solving student problems, and they were problems that I had. Okay, so some initial thoughts before we get going. First of all, I mentioned you got to use a tasting grid, but you got to be thorough with it. All of us that are working through these wines, especially you as students, you can't take just one thing and drive home with it, right? So you can't say, oh, this wine has kumquat in it, so it's got to be Viognier. That almost never works, okay? So one fruit, not going to work, okay? What else about it? The fruit, again, is the most subjective aspect of tasting. It's the one where everybody gets into arguments because we all give different specific fruit, even though the kinds of fruit will probably be the same. So fruit doesn't matter so much. What does matter is the quality of the fruit, how ripe it is, how tart it is. Does it have botrytis? Is it raisinated? Things like that. That can be important, okay? So then non-fruit aromas and flavors, the most important thing, because that's where the impact compounds live. And that means that you need to use multiple factors to identify a grape and then in the end a wine. So, and I list them there. The most important ones that I just talked about are fruit quality and character, impact compounds, and finally connecting those two things, especially fruit quality, to the structural levels. And underneath that, holding it all up like structural support is cause and effect. That affects every aspect of tasting. Okay.
Tim, just one quick note. There was a typo in some of the little box stickers that went
Okay.
on the wines.
Yep.
So I want to make sure that everyone knows, even if it says 161A, the wine underneath it is the correct one for 164. That was my typo at the winery, and I
Okay.
caught almost all the boxes, but there were about 20 boxes that went out that said 161. The
Okay.
outside of the box says 164. And so as long as your outside box says 164, you have the right wines. I just want to
Okay.
make sure that everyone knows that.
So Bill, we're going to be good. Okay. All right. We can go to the next slide, please. All right. So let's get to wine number one, everybody. And then what we'll do, we're going to alternate going through these wines like we normally would in a Master the World tasting. But then we're going to talk about different concepts in between. So everybody take glass number one. And we're going to take a look at it at a white background. This is like visual aids, the Vanna White part of the exercise. All right, so what we can see about this, and we'll talk about it in a second, is that the color of the wine is probably straw. It's a medium straw color. It's not yellow, certainly not gold. Okay, and we'll talk about the things that impact color in wine in just a moment. But let's just say, to me, that means the wine is relatively young and it's probably unoaked. And we'll find those things out. My glass still has bubbles in it. Bubbles is carbonic acid. It's dissolved CO2, and that's left over from bottling. Some wineries actually add CO2 as a preservative at the time of bottling. And if it's there, you just note it. Not a big deal. Certainly not sparkling wine. Okay. And then looking at these questions here, I want you to consider the quality and character of the fruit. And then again, we're going to focus on non-fruit aromas and flavors. And then we're going to focus on the structure. What you will find is these 4 questions are the same for all 6 wines, okay? Because those are, to me, are the most important questions. All right, now let's go ahead and smell the wine. And I'll just say the wine smells really good. It smells yummy. Okay, there's a lot going on. I'll start with fruit. The fruit is it's a mix of citrus fruit, both tart and sweet. It's a mixture of orchard fruit, that being apple and pear. There's some tropical fruit here a little bit, maybe some kiwi, but there's also some stone fruit. So going back to the citrus, so it's sweet and tart both. So I have mandarin orange and maybe Meyer lemon. There's also lime here, and it is like the pith and peel and the flesh, and it's all very fresh. So this again reflects the color of the wine. It's relatively young. In terms of orchard fruit, it's green apple and maybe underripe pear. Once again, fresh. Stone fruit especially, that's to me, stone fruit and orange really leapt out of the glass. So this is like white peaches, really ripe white peaches and apricots, and they are fresh and ripe and just they smell delicious. And then finally a little kiwi and maybe a little mango. But to me, what dominates the fruit is again the orange, the sweet citrus, and the stone fruit again. Okay. Now smell the wine again, because now once we get beyond the fruit, okay, so now we have to do the work. All right. The wine's it's quite floral. It's really pretty. It's like citrus blossoms. It's like honeysuckle. What else? Maybe even a little elderflower, a little herbal. Because then what I get beyond that is some really light herbal qualities. Something like elderflower and verbena, and also maybe lemongrass. Okay, but it's not really strong. Instead, what also I get is something akin to hemp or even beer. Believe it or not, it smells like lees, pilsner. Okay, reminds me of Pilsner Urquell, which is one of my favorite beers. Okay. What else about that? There's no oak that I can pick up. So there's no toast, sweet spice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right. So think about what we have so far is that we got something that's fairly floral, fruit forward. And the last thing I will say on the nose, there's definitely mineral. It smells saline. It smells like Visine. It smells like river stones, like that term petrichor, which is rainwater falling on stones. Okay. All right. So we got all that to work with on the nose, which is quite a bit. Let's go ahead and taste it, please. Mm. You know, when a wine smells that good, you just hope it tastes as good. And the tasting part is the winemaking part because it's texture. And in white wines, that's fining. It's fining trials and getting the texture of the wine right. And then in red wines, it's tannin management, which is one of several different processes. But this is really delicious. Um, what about this? As so often is the case, you know, the fruit and tartans up a little bit. So there's more tart citrus. There's some more, I would call it grapefruit or almost regular lemon. There's still the Meyer lemon and the orange. The green apple is stronger. The white peach is a little tartar. The mango, same thing. And the kiwi, the same thing. I mean, kiwi is very acidic anyway. Okay. Take another sip and let's check everything else out. Hmm. And we'll let that sink in. Yeah, because we're going to get to the structure in just a second. Structure for me, and the acid alcohol thing, that's delayed response. I need 5 seconds, 7 seconds at least to have a clue. Before then, and it really starts with the acidity, which is higher than I expected. It's the mineral, and the mineral dominates the middle of the wine. The mineral, once the fruit goes away and before the acid and the phenolic bitterness kick in, the middle is all mineral. And it's like sucking on a pebble, which I did as a little kid, and it was weird, but what can you say? Okay. So yeah, there's mineral, and again, it almost tastes salty. And then what happens is the acid, and the acid here is medium plus plus. It's close to high. It's much higher than I thought it would be. At the same time, the alcohol, and the way to check alcohol out is to, everybody for science, take a sip again. Mm. And notice what happens is that the third sip now, fruit gets even tartar, acid goes up. And then in the finish, it tastes like almond skins. It's bitter. So that's phenolic bitterness, semi-aromatic grape. And the connection that you make with this wine is that there's flowers, floral, which I can even taste. And at the same time, there's phenolic bitterness. So this is a, relatively speaking, thicker skin white grape. And if you have juice in contact with skins, you get phenols that live in the skins. Okay. All righty. What else can we say about this? The alcohol, I say, oh, inhale, medium. And the finish is long, complexity, medium plus. This is a really good example of this wine. Okay, here are your choices. You have Chardonnay, the ubiquitous Chardonnay. You have Chenin Blanc. You have Albarino. Your choices for place. And by the way, if you don't think it's any of those three, you should go for it and tell us what you think it is, because people have been correct in the past. Okay, I'm just going to say that. In terms of a place, France, of course, for the Chardonnay and the Chenin Blanc, and then Spain for Albarino, South Africa for Chardonnay and Chenin Blanc, and then California for all of those things, right? Okay, so think about it. Think about what we isolated and cast your vote.
I'm also just going to encourage everyone to vote, even if you don't have the wines. And I know some of you do not have the wines in front of you. Tim is going through a very elaborate assessment of the wine. And the theory part, as Tim, you talk about in your book, is very important in being able to blind taste. You want to talk a little bit more about that while we give people a few more seconds, just getting the theory of the descriptors that you're saying and putting
Right,
that theory to the
right.
test.
Well, that's a great point, Lee Ming. Everything connected to the grid and defining the grid, but also underneath there is theory, right? Because getting to a conclusion somehow, not only do you have to know grape varieties and connect them to classic places, but in many cases, there are classifications and laws that really are based on quality of a place, like Chianti, for example, or Chablis, or in Germany for all the predicates, and yeah, so theory always plays a part, and that's a great point.
Great. We have an other at least. So one or two
Yes.
of you have said that. So if you are an other, please don't be shy. Let us know what you're thinking it is. And I just remind everyone that the polling is absolutely anonymous. So
Yeah,
there is no
absolutely
shame in
vote.
putting an answer in there.
Yeah. So vote everybody. So again, if I was tasting this wine blind, the things that really hit me about it is the mix of almost sweet and ripe and very tart fruit, and then flowers, and then pronounced lees contact, mineral, and phenolics. Those 4 or 5 things, and all of a sudden, to me, they all glom together, and they narrow down my internal world. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill is saying.
Bill caught your hint. I caught that too.
Amanda,
That was
Amanda,
very
this
helpful.
yeah, Amanda, this is dry. Okay, and that's a good thing. So if you swallow a bit of the wine, the real measure of sweetness or dryness of wine is the finish. Because
Yeah.
most of the taste receptors for sweetness are towards the front of your mouth, tip of your tongue, but they're all over the place. They go down to your esophagus, and it's really how does the wine finish? That's a good point. Okay, people voted for Albarino. They loved it and went to Spain. Okay, some people went to France and South Africa, probably for Chenin Blanc. It looks like nobody voted for Chardonnay. For once, nobody voted for Chardonnay. Shocking. Okay, so let's review. Let's see what we
Tim,
got.
while we're going through the flight, will you answer Amanda's question on, oh shit, sorry. Where is my I need to make sure that my Google Earth, I think it's
Yeah, so Amanda said, are you thinking medium? So Amanda, think of dry, off dry, medium sweet, dessert sweet. And so this is dry. This is not bone dry, but this is dry. So that means 2% residual sugar or less, generally. Okay, it's the equivalent of brut champagne. Okay,
All right, I'm going to go back. Unfortunately, my slide was misordered. So I'm going to just show this and here we go.
okay. So we're getting on the plane, an SFO, and we're going to have to overnight it. Okay, which means I want an exit row aisle seat. I want leg room, right? And I want at least 2 glasses of wine.
Yep, there
And we're
you
going to
go.
cross and we're going to go to the Iberian Peninsula and Galicia, which is on the northwest coast of Spain. It's green Spain. It's a part of Spain that was settled by Celts over 2,000 years ago. Crazy. And the winery is called Bodegas Lagar de Pintos. And it is owned and run by sisters, Carmen and her name just flew out the window. Marta Castro. And Marta Castro Pintos is the winemaker. This really nails Albarino, okay, for all the reasons. The orange and peach fruit, which I said is minimally important, but flowers. Outside of a wine, other than a wine like Gewürztraminer or Muscat, it is really floral, really pretty flowers, mineral, phenolic bitterness, and pronounced lees contact. And the acid is elevated, which is surprising. And a good friend of mine, Keith Golston, MS, and Lee Meng, we've worked with him quite a bit. He calls Albarino Riesling palate and Viognier nose. So you got really pretty flowers, but really elevated acidity. So gotta love it. Okay.
And Tim, you talked about the phenolic bitterness before. Is that because this particular grape is thicker skinned?
Yeah, really good point. It's relatively thicker skin compared to other white grapes, and that means if the juice is in contact with it for any length of time, it really leaches out some phenolics, that bitterness. And tannin is a phenol too, but it's the same idea. Phenolic bitterness gives white wine structure. And there we are in green Spain. It's a beautiful place. I think there's a picture of a vineyard coming up. Yeah, and you can see the trellising off the ground because you're close to the ocean. It's humid and it's cool, rains a lot, so you need breezes, wind to go through, so you didn't get mold on the vines and grapes. Great stuff. And I think we
Tim,
have a
great
picture.
question here. What would you pair this with? And almond skin, the only way to detect phenolic bitterness.
Yeah, Dwayne, good question. It's literally it's a little feeling of astringency. Think about tannin, and when we get to the red wines, we're talking about tannin, but on a similar scale, but more restrained. It's the same sensation. So phenolic bitterness tastes bitter like tannin, and it feels astringent. Yeah. And there is a picture of Marta Castro Pintos, the winemaker. And this wine, talk about minimal intervention wine. This wine goes into huge, stainless steel tanks, indigenous fermentation, cooler temperature in the 60s. It stays on the lees for about 6 months. She never touches it. There's no batonnage. And then she basically does some fining with egg whites and bottles. That's it. And it is really delicious. What would I pair this with? Practically anything white wine. This to me is Albarino is such a versatile wine because it has high acid. That means it goes with practically anything but red meat. But at the same time, it has the fruit. There's so much fruit that pushes against the acidity that it's delicious by itself. So this is to me candlelit walk on the beach. No, just kidding. Yeah, it's a delicious wine. Have it
Uh,
anytime. Okay.
Tim, there are two comments about this, so I do think that you need to address it. Acid made me pick Shannon. But I'm
Ooh,
hearing you
well,
say
okay.
that Albarino has acid too.
Yeah, it does too. But all I can say is, again, you got to put all the pieces together. And I tell you what, I'm going to reserve an explanation for a little bit because we're going to talk about it in just a little bit, and I think it'll answer the question. Okay. So I think what do we have next? We've got either wine two, or we're going to talk about a concept. Yeah. So let's talk about cause and effect. Okay. So next slide, please. And again, I mentioned before, this is why. Why is the question your toddler who's age 3 drives you insane with? Because in the end, there's no why, and you have to tell them I said so. This, on the other hand, this asks why. What's the cause behind the way a wine looks, smells, and tastes the way it does? And it takes the tasting grid to the next level. So you have to know a tasting grid, but then behind it, you have to know all the reasons why. So the first thing that's talked about here is sight and the things that impact the appearance of wine. And there is one thing with many variations. The one thing is the level of oxidation, right? That could be the wine's overall age, which you see in both red and white wine categories. And in both, it could be extended oak aging, because oak aging in itself is a very gentle form of oxidation. With white wines, it could be extended skin contact to the extent you could have orange wine. Yeah. So there's definitely some color that could be leached from skins in white grapes. And then finally, botrytis for white wine. Botrytis, you have spores of a mold that we're going to talk about with impact compounds. The spores, pierce the skins of the grape and they raisinate it, and that creates oxidation, right? So that, botrytis wines, be they sweet or dry, are always deeper in color. And with red wines, there's oak aging, and then there's the pigmentation of the specific grape. So if you compare something like Pinot Noir, thinner skin, not as deeply colored, versus Syrah, which is much thicker skinned, a lot more pigment, or maybe even something like Malbec. Okay, next slide, please.
Mhm.
All right, cause and effect in terms of the nose. First of all, checking out the wine to make sure it's okay. Hopefully there's no TCA, trichloroanisole. And also, these wine faults, there's one of the kids from Lunez du Vin is called Les Dufault, the flaws. Really expensive. It has 12 of the major faults in it. Yeah, it's good to check out. They're very expensive. So if you buy one, couple of suggestions. Buy it with several people, and then whoever has it, they need to keep it in the garage. Do not keep it in your house. Oh my God, it would be terrible. Maria, I'm looking at your question now. I said Riesling palate and Viognier nose. Okay. All right. Once you get past the hygiene, and the important thing is context is everything. This is going to come up. Other than TCA and certain sulfur compounds, there are wine faults that are contextually accepted and even traditional in certain wines. And I'm thinking of Brettanomyces or Brett and VA, volatile acidity. So there, I can think of, you might find both of those in Amarone, right? Old school Amarone. You might find VA in old school Barolo or Rioja Gran Reserva. Wines that spend a lot of time in oak, extended time in oak, often develop VA. Okay. So that's something about wine faults. All right, moving on. Oh, all right. So we were going to go back. Why don't you go back just a second, if you could? Yeah. Okay. The next step is the fruit condition, and the fruit condition, if the fruit is ripe, if tart, if it's stewed, blah blah blah. That's really about timing of harvest, right? Or it's about place. So how cold or warm is the place, meaning how ripe or not do the grapes get? And maybe after the fact, the grapes are dried on mats, they're raisinated. There's that too. Okay. Impact compounds, which you're going to cover separately, that's that subset of aroma and flavors. That's grape chemistry, or some of them, or have to do with winemaking. Okay. All right. The presence of earth and mineral or not. important, and then the presence of oak or not, okay? One blog post that's been on my radar has been half written forever is literally a decision tree for white wines and then red wines. So I will tell you, if I'm blind tasting white wines, the first thing I look for is oak. The next thing I look for is earth and mineral. And that after those two things, I start looking for important impact compounds. And once I go through that short list, I'm pretty much close to where I want to be. So look for that in the future. Okay, Lee Mang, thanks. And let's go to the palate. So in terms of cause and effect, first, is the wine dry as the residual sugar? And if there is residual sugar, why? Was the wine fortified? Does it have really high alcohol and high residual sugar? In which case it's, it's like port, sherry, or Madeira. Or is the residual sugar and not a lot of alcohol, as in German Riesling, where the wine was sterile filtered, stopped the fermentation, you have residual sugar. So again, that's a question to ask. Next up, dry extract. Easiest way to define that is particulate matter. It's stuff in the solution, which is in the wine, if you don't find and filter it out. Dry extract has to do with old vines and low yields, meaning that you could have a really rich, dense wine without alcohol, okay? Because usually if you have a really full-bodied wine, you've got high alcohol, which comes with a lot of glycerin. In this case, dry extract wines, and the Germans and Austrians are crazy about it, it means that the wines are of high quality because they came from really great fruit, where not a lot was done in the finding and filtration end, meaning the wine is very rich because it's old vines and low yields, but it doesn't have high alcohol. Okay, so dry extract has to do with quality, okay? Long way to explain short term. Next up is the structure, and we'll talk about the structure between wine 5 and 6. Acidity, just gauging it, how high is it, and if it's a red wine that has alcohol, was the wine acidulated, okay? Alcohol, fruit ripeness, the two should go together. If you've got raisinated fruit in a wine, that means the alcohol should be beyond 14, even 15%, right? And likewise, if it's really tart fruit, the alcohol is not going to be high, okay? Phenolic bitterness means what? Semi-aromatic or aromatic white grape variety. And then tannin, grape tannin versus oak tannin, and is there both? And then how were the tannins managed? All right, so there's a lot of questions I posed, but knowing the answers to those, which is going to take you some study and some time, and don't worry about it. It's wine. It's a good thing to study. It could really tell you a lot about the wine. Okay, moving on. All right, so again, we're going to take everything I just asked you, and you put these pieces together and you add them up, and they will help you get to a really well-reasoned conclusion, even to a specific place. And if it's a place in Europe, that could involve this set of laws and a classification. Okay? All right. So cause and effect, what's important, and I mentioned a few of these points earlier. One, you got to know a tasting grid cold. You have to know it so well that you could take your Aunt Bernina from Des Moines and sit her down, even without a glass of wine, and you could explain the tasting grid to her. And not only that, you could explain why behind it. Okay? And if you can do that, explain the tasting grid and cause and effect to someone who's not in wine, you are there, and it's all in long-term memory. That's where you want to get to. Okay, let's get back to tasting. Wine number 2. Now for something completely different. How's everybody doing? Okay, everybody seems to be good. Charlene, tips for assessing alcohol level. I think this is medium. Well, it was, Charlotte, but when, and I'm going to cover this a little bit more slides and a few more slides, but when you take a sip of wine and you spit it out or you swallow it, it's Friday. And then you say, after the fact, you say, oh, and inhale. And how much heat do you get, right? Because on one end, you've got Mosel Riesling at 9%, and you'll get heat, some heat, a little bit, but you'll get a lot of acid because there's no alcohol. And then if you've got something like Barossa Shiraz, you'll feel the heat in here. And then, of course, if it's Grey Goose, it's a full body experience. But okay, let's take a look at wine number 2. What do we notice right off the bat? Deeper color. Okay, so I'm going to say this is yellow. I'm going to say this is medium yellow. There's still a little bit of green in it. Okay, so the wine could still be fairly young. What else about it? It is clear, reflects a lot of light. There's nothing floating around it in terms of sediment. And then the legs, tiers, viscosity are medium plus. And really, to me, maybe not a surprise because of the depth of the colors. We will see what it is. If it's alcohol, residual sugar, yeah. All right, everybody, why don't you smell it, please? Okay, similar but very different, yeah. First of all, not as fruity, yeah. The one is clean, medium plus intensity. And here, it's funny, we've got, the fruit and the non-fruit pushing it against each other. So we certainly, with a fruit checklist, I'm going to go yes on the orchard fruit. There's riper apple. It's yellow, almost golden, delicious. There's a mix of kind of yellow grapefruit that's very tart and lemon with maybe a little Meyer lemon, but it's mostly really ripe orchard fruit set off by tart citrus, okay? In terms of what else? It's definitely floral. But notice, everybody pick up your Albarino again and just smell it. Because in the flower scale, the Albarino is about a 6, right? It's not 9 or 10 like Gewürztraminer or Viognier, something like that. And then this wine, by comparison, maybe the floral is 3. Yeah, 2 or 3. But there's citrus blossoms is a good way to describe it, or narcissus, some kind of white flowers. All right, beyond that, then what I call botanicals. And they are herbal type things, but notice to me, and I'll just say it right now, there's no pyrazines here. Okay, so that's one of the first things I'm checking for after the fruit, and there's no bell pepper. So I've ruled out Sauvignon Blanc, which maybe I'm breaking the conclusion up here, but there are other things. So the other things would be it's like green tea, it's like lemon verbena, it's like elderflower again, and it's especially like chamomile. This smells like chamomile tea. Okay, that for me is a trigger for a grape variety. Beyond that, there's mushroom. That's really with the earthiness. This wine has earth and mineral together. And to me, the Albarino was only about the mineral. This has mushroom and earth and almost turned soil. And then chalky, really like chalk dust. Okay. And then with the oak department, maybe there's some used oak here. Okay. It is not, the first wine was stainless steel. This is not. This is rounder, little fuller, really deeper on the nose. I'm suspecting there could be used oak. We can tell by the texture. Okay. All right. Anything else? Maybe a little underripe white peach for the fruit. I think I got it all. Yeah. And one more thing. Yeah. One more thing I want to point out. Yeah. Lees contact once again. So there is it's toast. It's almost champagne-like. Yeah. Okay. Please taste it.
And Tim, I just want to make sure for those who are not as familiar, the Lee's contact, you're getting it from the mouthfeel.
No, from the nose. And I just
Mm,
got it from the palate. Okay, so Lee's contact, and it's coming up in the impact compounds.
mm,
It smells like toast or yeast or brioche or bread dough. Okay.
great.
And now that I taste the wine, it's the creaminess in the middle of the wine. Okay. So if you got wine that's, sits on the fine lees after secondary fermentation for, who knows, several months, as long as 6 months. Okay. All right. I'm going to taste it again. Everybody do that, please. Okay. This wine, the acidity is even higher than the Albarino. Okay. Also jumping ahead, saying, oh, inhale, the alcohol is still medium. The wine, though, feels richer. Okay. Interesting, huh? Once again, the fruit tightens up, but it's still yellow apple, yellow grapefruit. There's a little ripe peach in here. No tropical fruit. I get that the botanicals are even stronger. It actually reminds me of when you open a bag of spring greens, the salad greens, got that going on. The chamomile tea, it tastes like chamomile tea. It tastes like chamomile tea and yeast, lees. And then the earth and mineral is stronger. The middle of the wine is profoundly earthy and minerally. The oak, if it's there, is used. It doesn't have the really bright, smooth texture I associate with stainless steel wines. So probably some used oak here. And Maria, I would agree. There's a little oxidation, and it comes through. It's almost like bruised apples. The apples that you cut and they turn brown. And then finally, what else about it? Got the acidity, got the medium alcohol, and there is some phenolics on the finish. Everybody swallow a bit. Yeah, it's right there on the finish. Yeah, that's really good. And the dryness level is dry. In fact, I think this is drier than the first wine. probably 1% or thereabouts. Finish is long, complexity, medium plus headed towards high. Okay, so Meg, if you're not getting as much acid, go back and forth between the two wines. You can always do that. Okay. Also notice that the fruit could be pushing against that acid. I think
Mhm.
really, I feel the acid on this wine on the enamel of my front teeth, which means it's high. Okay. That's my marker for high acid. Front of the teeth. Okay, here we go. Okay, so that's for wine six somehow.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I don't know what
goodness.
happened.
Okay, so if you're voting, here are your choices. Similar to wine number one, we have Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, and Riesling. You can vote for. There we go. And or other.
Right. Yeah.
Don't if you want to go for other, don't hesitate. Go for it. If we're talking about places in Europe, France could be for any three of those grapes: Chardonnay and Burgundy, Chenin Blanc and the Loire, and Riesling from Alsace. Germany for Riesling, of course. South Africa for Chenin Blanc and Chardonnay, and then California for all three of those grapes. Okay, so vote your tally your scores and vote. And
Tim, I have a question while people are voting. When I
yeah,
was, based on your selection and I was doing the purchase of these wines, I was
mhm.
talking to the distributor rep and I said, I want a current vintage. And he said 2018 was the current vintage. Now we're in 2025 and this wine still tastes really good. Can you talk
Yep.
a little bit about the ageability and why are we on 2018 when we're in 2025?
Okay, well, we got to reveal the wine first, and
Ah,
there's a good reason why. Okay.
great. Awesome. I did reveal the vintage before that, but I think the oxidation question kind
Yep.
of triggered that in my mind.
Yep. Well, yeah. All right. So once we close the poll, we'll talk about this. And
Awesome.
some of it has to do with the grape. Most of it has to do with the place and the
Mm,
producer. Okay.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, people, I'm trying to only close the poll when we get to the participation rate of wine number one. So the last few
Vote
people,
up.
please
Just
vote.
just go for it. Come on.
All right,
It's Friday.
I'm gonna count down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go, Tim. Here are the results.
Here we go. Okay. So some people for Chardonnay, a lot of people for Chenin Blanc. Keep Riesling, most people in France, some Germany, South Africa. Okay, Li Meng, let's show them what we got.
Okay.
And this is really kind of a special wine. Um, so we're getting on the plane. This time we don't have to go too far. This is probably a 90-minute flight, if that, We're just going to fly across the Pyrenees, head a little north into the Loire Valley to Anjou, the Anjou subregion. And we're going to go to Domaine des Beaumards, and we are in Savinier. So Savinier, this is arguably probably the greatest place on earth for dry Chenin Blanc. And Domaine Beaumard, one of the two or three top producers of Savinier. So Savinier, the place, it's one of the smallest appellations in the Loire Valley. It's less than 500 acres. 100% Chenin Blanc, dry white wines, really unique soil types. It's a combination you don't see, I don't know, anywhere else. It's like blue slate and schist and volcanic. And it's the Savinier as a place faces due south on the Loire River. It's like a sun trap. And what can we say about this? So, this is Domaine Beaumard. This is Florent Beaumard, one of the top winemakers in the Loire Valley. They, like a few other white wine producers around the planet, they hold on to their wines for a while. I think about Pusey Vale for Riesling in Australia and certain other producers, but this is current vintage, right? And so the reason is that these wines are so reductive and tightly wound when they're finished that they leave them in the cellar for 3 or 4 years before they release them. They've also aged remarkably well. I've had 40-year-old Beaumards 7 years before, and they at 40 years are just fine. Thank you. So the wines, and this is curious because nobody, thinks that Chenin Blanc is capable of doing something like that, but in the right hands, in the right place, it is. This is one of France's greatest white wines, and the thing is that it's still affordable. That's the thing about it. Okay.
I love how excited people are to catch the right identity.
Yeah.
We have some questions here. How common is it for Loire Chenin to be dry versus off dry?
Well, okay, so David, short question, long answer. It depends on, first of all, on the appellation, and then it depends on the vintage, right? So historically, the Turin and Vouvray and Anjou, cold places, right? And then in the last 25 years, climate change has changed everything. It really depends on the vintage because, in vintages where grapes get ripe, you'll find residual sugar. In other vintages where the grapes don't get so ripe, traditional, the wines are dry. Unless, in the case of Vouvray, you're talking about second demi-sec, in which case there are laws that govern how much residual sugar need to be in the wines. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's that. Okay.
And I think there's a question about South Africa versus
Yeah.
France. How would you tell the difference?
Well, with South African, higher alcohol, number one. They're larger wines. They have more phenolics, still mineral driven, and just they're richer and they're practically always dry, even bone dry. And more than a few of them have used oak, so they're not as mineral driven as this wine. Okay, so
Mhm.
yeah, you taste them next to each other. There's just the South African wines are richer, they're dry, not as much mineral though. So.
Yeah. So I brought up the vintage. You answered the vintage that they hold on to it. Ivan's
Yeah.
got a question here. So it's a bit oxidated because of the vintage, or just that's the style of winemaking?
That's a style of winemaking, and they believe on hanging on to their wines longer. And I think, oxidation is not a bad thing, right? I mean, we like oxidation in really good red wines and in good white wines. It makes them more complex too.
Mhm, mhm. As we go through the vineyards, Tim, there is a couple of people asking about food pairings. How would you
Ooh.
treat the food pairing here differently from the Albarino?
Well, with here, I would say both of these wines will handle acid in any dish really well. I'm trying to think of something I would have with this. Actually, what came up? I thought of chicken pot pie. Don't ask why. But
Mm,
something like that that's rich, that has, you can have dairy and richness and cream and things like that. And this wine with the acidity would just wipe it clean, but also something with fennel or something with herbs, that this wine would do well with. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
And how is it not Riesling or Chardonnay? Because those two got
Ah,
almost 20% votes on them.
okay. So Riesling, first of all, would have, a broader range of fruit. It probably, if it was dry, would have the TDN, the petrol thing we'll talk about in a bit. And then a Chardonnay, I'm looking for least contact and malolactic. There's very little malolactic on this wine. There's no diacetyl. And probably oak if it was Chardonnay. Okay. Especially if it was this good, there would definitely be new oak on it. Yeah. And there's
Yeah, this
Florent.
is
I think he's one of the most talented winemakers in the Loire. Fantastic.
this is officially a dry wine though, right, Tim?
Yeah, Amanda, this is dry. Yeah, this is definitely. Maria said veggie risotto. Yum, yum. Yes, that would work. That's a really good idea. In fact, last night, my wife Carla made curried chicken and rice with vegetables, and this wine would be perfect with it. Okay. All right, let's talk about wine number three. And now for something completely different, just like they see on TV. Let's take a look. All right, so here we go. You can see the wine. There you go. And now this wine is also yellow. Okay, so I'm thinking age, botrytis, oak, least contact, something like that. We're going to find out. What else about it? Pay attention to the quality of the fruit. And here, especially with this wine, the non-fruit is really important. Okay, and then we'll get to the structural levels. What else about it? It is clear. The legs and tears are medium plus. And let's go ahead and smell it. Oh my goodness. It's really different. Okay. What's really different is the non-fruit, and I'll get to it in a second. It's got quite a bit of fruit. Okay. It's got both sweet and tart fruit for citrus. It's got Meyer lemon and just regular lime, and maybe even a little tangerine, something orangey, but really tart. It's got green apple and like Asian pear, and it's fresh and ripe. It's also got some stone fruit like apricots and yellow peaches, and maybe a little kiwi once again for tropical. Everything is fresh. It's pretty fresh, and that's interesting because the color would lead me to believe the wine would be a little more developed, but We'll find out more about it in a second. There is lots of non-fruit going on. First of all, it's floral. It smells like elderflowers and citrus blossoms and honeysuckle. It's really quite floral. Not as floral as the Albariño. I'm going to put it between the Chenin Blanc you just had and the Albariño, okay? But beyond that, then there's all sorts of what I call, and from the last wine, botanicals, but here they're different, okay? This wine smells like, and as soon as I say these words, many of you are going to race to a conclusion, but I'm going to say it anyway. It smells like white pepper. It also smells like daikon and radish, and it smells like parsley and lentils. So all these vegetative type things, but notice those aren't pyrazines that I'm talking about. And lemongrass, once again, citrusy, lemongrass, herbal. There's kind of some caraway seed. And then there's both earth and mineral. There's like brown mushrooms, turn soil, and then there's river rocks, mineral. And there's really no detectable oak whatsoever. Maybe there will be on the palate, okay? All right, let's taste it, please. Mm. Oh, that's delicious. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So it's a lot of fruit, but notice what happens halfway through. First of all, mineral pops up. It's pretty strong. But then the acid just goes, it gets like afterburners. The acid, and all of a sudden, you've got all this fruit and you think, oh, it's going to have some residual sugar. Zero. It is dry. In fact, it's the driest of the three white wines. Okay. So this is really dry, close to bone dry. Curious, isn't it? What else about it? The fruit turns tart. The citrus is all tart now. It's kind of like lemon and yellow grapefruit. The apple is green. The pear is green and underripe. That if there is anything, yeah, the kiwi, very sour. And that's curious because look at the color and the richness of the wine. And this wine, everybody, perfect example of dry extract. Because if I can jump ahead, the alcohol level it's about the same as the first two wines. And yet palate-wise, it's richer. That's dry extract, which means old vines, low yields, okay? What else about it? Then I'm going to take another sip. You do too, because pay attention to all the botanicals and then the structure, the acid, the alcohol. Mm. All right, I'm going to work from the back and go forward. It's got phenolic bitterness, so it's a semi-aromatic grape. The acid really kicks in. The acid probably the same level as the Sauvignon. Close, but really rich and full. And then all the botanical stuff, the white pepper is stronger on the palate, radish, daikon, parsley, lentils, greeny type things. Yeah. Okay, so Jerry, I'm going to answer your question in just a second. That's complicated. Leave it to you, Jerry, to ask a question like that. Okay, the finish is long. The complexity on this wine is high. This is really good wine. All right, no oak whatsoever. Earth and mineral together. Very pronounced in the mid palate. This is a wine I would love to spend like an hour or 2 hours working through a glass because it is really complex. Okay, so let's get to our poll. What do we have?
Tim, once you said white pepper, that's all I could think of.
Yeah, vroom, vroom, vroom. Okay, I know everybody jumped to contusions, suffer contusions, or whatever it is. Okay, so we have Grüner Veltliner from Austria. We have Sauvignon Blanc blend, which could be from France or Austria, because they make a lot of it there, or New Zealand or California. And then Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio from France, probably, in which case, or New Zealand makes a lot of Pinot Gris, as does California. Okay, all right, so everybody vote, please. And Jerry, now I'm going to ponder your question and see if I could do it justice. What is the difference between richness and texture from old vines and least contact? Well, that's a tough one. I think it's just a matter of, here they both give richness to the texture. At least contact tastes like something. So least contact will taste like creme fraiche or yeast or toast or brioche or bread dough. And then old vines is just the intensity and the depth of the fruit. And that's about the best I can answer. Nobody's ever asked me that before. That's a good question. Okay. All right.
Cool.
Did we do our poll, everybody?
Just a few more percentage points, and then we would have a good participation rate. I'm only at 80%, and we hit about 85 the last time. So for the last few people, Tim's given you a lot of hints, a lot of clues. Let's see if we can get that through. And fine bubbles in this were most
Yeah, Jerry,
common.
this is a matter of just hardly any finding or filtration. And you've got some CO2 left over from, probably malolactic if they in this did go through malolactic because it's rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will also tell you guys that we open the bottles and then rebottle it so quickly and shut it down so quickly with an actual capper, a machine capper, that our goal is to keep the winemaker's intent intact as much as possible. So any
Yeah.
CO2 that you're seeing, we don't add CO2s to it. That is from
Right.
the original
It's
winery.
there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
close the
Let's
poll
see what we
down.
did. Let's see. Everybody went for my hints. They did indeed. All right. So most of you went to Grunewaldliner in Austria with the very breathing of the words white pepper. But yeah, this is a superb example of Grunewaldliner. So let's hop on the plane. And for once, we're not building up a lot of miles here. We will in just a second, maybe. We're going to jump around, but here we're going to stay in Europe. And this would be a quick flight. This would be an hour, if that. In fact, amazingly enough, Lee Mang, so I'm visiting this winery 2 weeks from yesterday. So I will be in Austria the first week of April with a group of MSs, including the fabulous Madeline Truffaut, and we're going to this winery, which is Weingut Leumer, and it's in the Comtal. And I think it's the Thursday of the week. And this guy, Fred Leumer, is kind of like a rock star. He's one of the top winemakers in Austria and certainly in the Comtal. Comtal here is the River Comp, so you have the Danube River. So important to wine in Austria, like the Rhine in Germany. But then, and we're talking Niederösterreich, which is Lower Austria, but what it means is that it's downriver on the Danube. And so you've got these three important small regions, the Wachau, the Kremstal, and the Comtal. And the Kremstal and Comtal, those are two small tributaries, the Krems River and the Compt River. And Comtal here, hilly, cooler because it's higher in elevation, known for Riesling and Grunewaldliner. And, the Leumer and Fred Leumer, one of the top estates. So great stuff. Here the wines, there's not a classification like you find in the Wachau, but certainly this richness is almost Schmaragd level, that kind of high density level and quality. Okay. This is a banker. I mean, you get a wine like this in a tasting exam, this is what you pray for because it shows you everything that you need for Grunewaldliner. Okay, so Bill McCallum. So Bill, you need to work on your memories for white pepper. Okay, that'll help you. Okay, and there's a chapter about that in the book too, by the way. Okay, did we cover everybody else? Okay, all right.
We did.
All right, there is Fred, and I'm going to get to meet him in less than 2 weeks. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about impact compounds. I'm going to go through these a little quickly. Okay. But again, no freaking out because this information is in the book. There's a whole chapter on it, and it's on my website. As I mentioned, this is a group of about 12 to 15 important aromas and flavors that are in classic wines. And we have to own them, okay? Your memories, you need to work on your memories for these things. Like, Bill was just saying about white pepper. That's one of them that you're going to work on, okay? All right, so what do we have?
Ivan will show you the book in a second at the end of the
Yep.
thing. It's Tim's book, Message in the Bottle, where he's written all about tasting techniques, and I cannot recommend it well enough. I'm sure folks here who are using the book religiously would recommend it too.
Yes. Okay, yeah, Message in the Bottle. Okay, so botrytis, first of all, it's a mold, right? It lives in the soil, lives in the ground. It gets on the plant material, i.e. the vines and the grapes. The spores of the mold pierce the grapes, they raisinate it, but they change the chemistry. What does it smell and taste like? That's the important thing. It smells like honey and honeysuckle, ripe stone fruits, like orange marmalade, toffee, saffron, ginger, button mushroom, okay? Usually we associate botrytis fruit or character in dessert wines. And most of the great non-fortified dessert wines are botrytis influence. So Sautern and Barsac, all the satellite communes there, Tokai in Hungary, Bernauslese and Trockenbernauslese in Germany and Austria. Okay. By the way, no botrytis on ice wine. You can't make wine from frozen rotten grapes. Okay. But we can also find botrytis, in dry table wines. And Alsace Pinot Green and Gewürztraminer, German and Grosses Gewächs, the Grand Cru wines, and then Vouvray Demi-Sec, and certainly more. Okay. Up next, with is Brettanomyces. And I did that. I chose that picture for all of you who are around my age. That's the cover to a Pink Floyd album, Adam Hart Mother, just for you. Okay, Brettanomyces, it's a yeast. It's also found in vineyard soils. It too gets on plant material that gets taken into the winery, and then all of a sudden it's in the microbiome of the winery. And a little bit goes a long way. But here's the deal. It smells like earth, leather, barnyard, animal, sauvage, as the French would call it. And then the dark side is when it's too much, and then it smells like fecal and medicinal and Band-Aid. I call it small rodents covered in Band-Aids. Not pretty, okay? You don't want that. But the interesting thing is the threshold for Brett in us is individual. It's unique from person to person. Some people love it. Other people absolutely loathe it in trace amounts. The whole Australian traditional winemaking culture, it's a fault, period. And it's not acceptable, okay? And yet you find it in really, really expensive Bordeaux and other wines as well. And so it's highly contextual, okay? All right, next up is carbonic maceration. Okay, here we're talking about winemaking technique that's associated with Nouveau Beaujolais and Beaujolais Village. You take whole clusters of grapes, you fill up a stainless steel tank, you seal it, you pump in CO2 so it's an anaerobic environment, no oxygen. Two things are going to happen within short order. First of all, gravity, nature bats last. The grapes in the top are going to crush the grapes in the bottom. Okay, you're going to have juice and partially crushed grapes. But what happens at the top is that in this anaerobic environment, fermentation is going to start inside the grapes because you've got yeast on all of this stuff that's in the tank. And so you get this carbonic maceration or this intracellular fermentation inside, and eventually the CO2 that's a byproduct of fermentation bursts the grapes. And what you're getting is really fruit intensive, deeply colored wine. What you're not getting is tannin, okay? And that's the whole thing about Beaujolais Village and Nouveau Beaujolais. How do we know what, carbonic wines smell like? They smell like candy. They smell like Jolly Rancher candy. They smell like bananas. They smell like Hawaiian punch, okay? Note, it's also used for other wines. Really inexpensive Côte d'Aron can sometimes be carbonic, even mass market commercial Zinfandel, Shiraz, etc. Now, the next slide, if you have carbonic maceration, you have whole clusters of grapes held together with stems. And the stems are part of the fermentation. And depending on how green or ripe they are, when they ripen or lignify, they turn brown. And they add flavor to the wine. So usually you have grapes, let's say Gamay for Beaujolais Village. And you've got, grape stems that are kind of green. It's going to add a green flavor to it. So if you have whole cluster or carbonic wines, you're going to have stem tannin, and the two go hand in hand. Okay. Next up, something we associate with white wines, and that's diacetyl. Smells like buttered popcorn, microwave popcorn. It's a byproduct of malolactic fermentation, and I think of it when I think of Chardonnay, classic Chardonnay and Burgundy winemaking, but also white wines that are made like Chardonnay, like Viognier, and even some Sauvignon Blancs that are oak aged, but also they go through malolactic, and they could show a little diacetyl as well. Okay. All right. Next up is lees contact, and all three of these wines have lees contact. Okay. Semi-aromatic grapes. You don't have oak on them, but what you do have is lees. So you're leaving the must and then the wine after primary fermentation and even after malolactic in contact with the lees. You have the option as the winemaker of stirring it, called bâtonnage in French, which adds even more creaminess to the texture, but then all those aromas and flavors. Yeast, brioche, bread dough, toast, right? And that process of the lees as they break down is called autolysis. We associate that in all sorts of wines, but also really important in making classic method, sparkling wine, okay? All right, going on, New Oak. And this is just to say that, you know what, if there's oak there, you got to recognize it. So if you've got a wine and it's showing you toast, smoke, baking spices, vanilla, all that stuff, that's from the oak. It's not from the wood itself. It's from the fact that you toasted or caramelized the inside of the barrels. Yeah. Important point is the last bullet on this slide, and that is don't fixate, don't become obsessed with trying to identify the origin of the oak barrels used to make the wine, because nowadays, wine baking being so urbanite and international, you have winemakers using oak from all over the planet. Some of my favorite Zinfandels from Jerry Seps at Storybook Mountain in Napa. He regularly uses 12 to 15 different kinds of barrels to make wine, and they're from all over the place. Okay. So that's a perfect example. However, the caveat here, if you get a red wine, especially usually red, and it smells like bourbon, that's American oak, because American oak has to be used in the production of making bourbon by law. And the two smell exactly alike. Okay. All right. Next slide. Phenolic bitterness. Okay. All three white wines have phenolic bitterness. You have semi-aromatic grapes with, relatively speaking, thicker skins. And if juice comes into contact for any length in time, a few hours, you are absorbing phenolics into the must and therefore the wine. Okay. And that little bit of bitterness and then the astringency on the finish. So, of course, semi-aromatic grapes, Albarino, Gruner Veltliner, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Gris, Chenin Blanc. Hey, those are the evil dwarves in our set of three white wines are there. And then the fully aromatic grapes have even more phenolics, Viognier, Gewürztraminer, Muscat, and Torrontés. All right. Next up, pyrazines for Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon family red wines. And it's a chemical compound that smells like green bell pepper and also grass, green herbs, jalapeno, on and on and on. Okay. And if you smell it in white wine, you're happy because whatever you're tasting is Sauvignon Blanc. Okay. All right. More, please. Next slide. Raisination. Yeah. So raisination is just recognizing raisinated fruit and realizing that the wine you're tasting, the grape stayed on the vine for a long, long time. Okay. So also asking yourself, well, okay, if not all the fruit in the wine is raisinated and some of it is less, what does that mean in terms of the grape and how it ripens on the vine? In which case it may ripen unevenly, in which case that would lead you to suspect the wine could be made from one of two or three different grapes. Okay. Okay, and what else? Harvesting overripe grapes, making late harvest wine like Amarone, like Recioto del Valpolicella, things like that, or like late harvest Zinfandel in California. And then that's making wine from dried grapes. Okay. One of my favorite dessert wines in Italy, Passito di Pantelleria from Sicily. Phenomenal wine. Delicious. Okay. Yeah, everybody, Li Ming's reassuring you, okay, I'm doing these really quickly, but they're in the book. You will have a recording of going and be able to go through this multiple times. And there's a lot here. And don't expect it to learn it all at once, but to implement it in chunks of 3 to 5 things. So don't drive yourself crazy or you won't remember things. Next up is Rotondone. Okay, we just had white pepper in the Gruner Veltliner, and that is Rotondone. That's a compound called the sesquiterpene, meaning there are 7 sides to it, the molecule. And it's a chemical compound that occurs in certainly Gruner Veltliner for white grapes and wines, and then in red wines, Rhone grapes. Syrah, most famously, but also Grenache, Mourvedre, and also Zinfandel. And there's other, northern Italian grapes like Marzemino and things like that. Even Schiava, I think you find a little peppery quality. Okay. All right, so Bill, we're going to work on your white pepper thing. Okay, we'll huddle. All right, next up, there's only a couple more left. TDN. All right, my little joke with the gas pump there. Okay, so this is a chemical compound we associate with Riesling. Okay, it smells like fusel, kerosene, gasoline. Okay, and there's the compound. That's what it is. German scientists didn't isolate it until 2006. And then I think in 2012, the Australian Wine Research Institute, they published a paper that said higher concentrations of TDN could be found in Rieslings that were made from grapes grown in a warmer climate with a shorter ripening season, just like Clare Valley and Eden Valley in South Australia. So yeah, or in Alsace or in Austria, warmer places. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Terpenes, flowers. Okay. In fact, all three white wines had terpenes, right? Especially the Albarino. And sweet citrus and floral compounds, semi-aromatic grapes. Okay, look, they're all the same suspects, three of which we just tasted. Fully aromatic grapes, even more. In fact, I think of those grapes, especially Gewürztraminer and Torrentes, they taste floral. They really do. And so they are intensely terpenic, as we say. Okay, next slide. Volatile acidity, vinegar, balsamic vinegar. So VA is a product of fermentation. In trace amounts, it can be found in practically every wine. However, if you can smell it, as in balsamic vinegar and red wine, people usually say that is an unacceptable level of VA, but it really depends on the wine, because as I mentioned towards the beginning of this seminar, there are classic old world red wines, European red wines like Amarone and Gran Reserva Rioja, also Northern Rhone Syrah, where you find VA regularly, and it's just part of the tradition and history of the style of wine. Okay. All right, that takes us to the red wines. Okay. And so much information, so we're going to do these kind of quickly. Much to your chagrin. No, it's going to be okay. Everyone, let's take wine number 4. And before you do that, you might take a look at the color of all three of the red wines. And there's a little bit of a theme going on with just how they look. All right. But here, I'm going to hold up this particular wine. Red wine, this is number 4. I can read through it. Okay, so it's a thinner skinned grape, whatever it is. Yeah, because if it were a Cabernet or a Syrah or something, you couldn't read through it. But I'm going to call it a medium plus almost deep ruby. The rim or the edge is a lighter ruby, still pink, right? So fairly young wine. And then tears, legs, viscosity, I would say medium plus. And there's really no staining of the tears. And that's what I would look for to see if it's a thicker skinned grape. All righty. Everybody, please smell it. Okay. I'm going to start with the fruit and then drill down. It's predominantly red fruit. Okay. And then there's some dark fruit too. There's really no what I would call dried or raisinated fruit or blue fruit. So red fruit, it's really pretty much, I would say, ripe and dried red cherry, sour red cherry, even cherry pit. There's some red plum that's almost dried, and maybe some cranberry that's almost craisin. So we got a combination of ripening level here, which to me may mean that the wine's just in a medium stage of evolution. We'll find out. Beyond that, the dark fruit is black plum, kind of like blackberry, maybe something with acid to it. And it is ripe and dried. At the same time, I mentioned that cranberry, so there's still some tart fruit going on here. My guess is that when we taste this wine, I mentioned beforehand, the difference between fruit from the nose to the palate is usually it tartens up. With red wines, it especially does that. We'll see if that's true. Non-fruit, and there's a lot of it. If you pull your nose out of the glass, it smells like dried rose petals. Okay, it's very pretty. From there, it's herbal. It's like tomatoes and tomato leaf. There's sandalwood. There's star anise and red licorice. And then there's oregano and like green savory herbs. That's really all I can put my finger on in terms of herbs, the kind of herbs. Soil wise, it's mushroom and there's like dried earth, but there's also, it's like dusty, it's chalk dust. So we have earth and mineral together. And then for oak, there's used oak here, I think, more than anything. I don't get the new vanilla sweet spice thing going on. What I do get is sandalwood and kind of like chestnut toast smoke. Okay, so used oak, and that's the French oak I just described, because it's really not very spicy at all. Okay, why don't you taste it, please? The first red wine of the day. All right, go ahead and taste it again for science, okay? Because I want the structure to make an impression on you, as if it won't. Okay, so Amanda, this one's for you. It's bone dry. This wine is bone dry. In fact, my mouth is drying out as I'm talking. Okay, the acid for a red wine is pretty high. It's high. The alcohol is medium plus, medium plus. Okay, so interesting, that we've got really high acid for a red wine, and the tannin, everybody, notice where the tannin is. It's in the front of your mouth and the back, both. So we have grape tannin in the front of the mouth for me, not everybody. And then we have oak tannin in the back. So there's used oak on this. But yeah, it's really tannin. Otherwise, the wine tartens up. It's tart. It's tart red fruit. It's like sour cherry and cherry pit. There's the tomato leaf. What else? There's star anise. That oregano herb comes into play. There's leather, sandalwood from the oak, and there's earth, and it's chalky. It's really chalky, and it's dry, and it's acidic, right? This is grown-up wine, everybody. This is not your, I'll have a glass next to the pool kind of a wine. You need food with this. Okay, so everybody, there's your poll. And man, this wine is a shock after the first three white wines, I should say. Okay, so we've got Pinot Noir, we've got Tempranillo or blend, and Sangiovese blend. Okay, your regions are France for the Pinot Noir, Italy for Sangiovese, Oregon for I guess Pinot Noir, and New Zealand. You can vote for New Zealand for Pinot Noir, and we left Spain off, so other can be Spain for the Tempranillo. Okay, but everybody, I'm going to take another sip of it because I like being thrilled by the palate of a wine.
Tim, I'm going to ask one question about using those impact compounds that you just taught us. So, in this particular wine, which of those impact compounds really stand out for you?
Only one. And I never really got it until just now on the finish of the wine, but now I go back, it's on the nose. So there's VA. So there is a balsamic note on the finish of this wine. I feel very fusel, volatile acidity, meaning it's acid and it's volatile. So it means it's evaporating really quickly in the nose of the wine, and now I go back, and now it smells like balsamic vinegar. Okay. But I got it right here in the throat. Okay. Amanda, yeah, medium body, more like medium plus, okay. So, all right. So everybody vote, make sure you vote. Don't mess around. Come on.
I will close the poll actually, because we've got kind of a unanimous voting here where most
Everybody
people
drove
are
to Tuscany with it. Okay, well, bless you for that, because that's the right place. All right, so Jerry, we'll talk about that, how to recognize this. Okay, so let's go to Tuscany. I mean, one of my favorite places on the planet. I mean, if you're there and you have a glass of wine, you're not happy, you could be the one with issues. Okay, it's such a beautiful place. The food's amazing. I mean, and the art and oh my God, it's one of my favorite places. Okay, all right. Okay, so Raphael, good thinking about Nebbiolo, but let me tell you, Nebbiolo, the color would be more advanced, more orange, and the wine would even be more acidic and more tannic, and the alcohol would be higher. Nebbiolo, especially Barolo Barbaresco, is a unique wine in that it has high acid, high tannin, and high alcohol. Yeah. Okay, here we are. Short flight. You're not racking up too many miles this time. We are going to Tuscany, to Chianti Classico, not Chianti Classico. Big difference. Chianti's pretty big place. Chianti Classico, the original zone from 1716. And this is the Castello di Bassi. And the original estate dates back to the 9th century, believe it or not. And they have been making wine since like the 1500s. It's remarkable. It's Italy. It's incredible. Chianti Classico, what can we say about this? By law, it has to be 80% minimum Sangiovese. Most wineries in the last 10 years are going towards 100%. They're cutting out international grapes like Cabernet, Syrah, et cetera, and going for 100% Sangiovese. This is textbook Chianti Classico, right? It's just Wonderful stuff. It was aged in a mix of, barrique, 225 liters, and then 500-liter barrels for 18 months, and then bottled. And this wine, Chianti Classico, easy 10 to 15 years in the cellar. What do they serve it with? If you're in Florence, bistecco fiorentino. So a thick T-bone steak that's literally about 2.5 inches thick. It's like what we call Pittsburgh. They practically burn the outside and the inside is blood rare. And if you're a carnivore, it's a beautiful thing. Okay. There is the Castello the winery, and that is Marco Bacci, the winemaker. And I would just say this is a great example of Chianti Classico. Yeah.
Great.
All right. Here we are. We're going to go into wine number 5. And everybody, if you got questions, I would say at this point, write them down, because then we can talk about them in the happy half hour after the fact. And I hope you'll stick around. Okay, wine number 5. And let's check out the color. Maybe a little deeper in color. So I'm going to call this a deep ruby. The edge or rim is, fuchsia or purple pink. So it's a relatively speaking, a young wine. And quite a bit of depth of color. The legs tier, et cetera, are high, full, slow. Half my glass is on vacation. What does that mean? Well, the wine could be sweet, or it's got really high alcohol. We're going to find out immediately when we put our nose in the glass. It really doesn't stain the glass too much, a little bit, but not too much. All right, everybody, please smell it. Aha, I was right. Okay, the alcohol is high, right? First thing I smell, and along with the alcohol, this is a perfect example of cause and effect. It smells like raisins and prunes, right? So there's really ripe raisinated fruit, but there is tartar fruit as well. And it's a mix of the raisinated, really ripe dried fruit. We've got dark fruit and we've got red fruit. And the red fruit here is tart. It's like dried raspberries, and it's cranberries, craisins. So that's very interesting. And remember what I said a few minutes ago about grapes that don't ripen evenly. I think this could be one of them. All right. Other than that, there's dark fruit too. There's like dark plum, really ripe, I would say cherries, bean cherries, and maybe black raspberries. And then the raisin and the prune. Okay. Maria Valletta says pickle. Maria, hold that thought. I'm going to get back to you. Okay. Okay. And then Ivan says beacon. I think you meant bacon. You two together. Okay. So we're gonna hold that thought over here, because it's relevant and it's important. All righty. What else? Okay. It's herbal. It reminds me of holly bush and maybe bay leaves and like laurel bushes and white. There's black pepper, not white. Black pepper. There's also not much earthiness to speak of, okay? And if you don't believe me, smell the Chianti Classico in comparison. I'm going to reach for my glass. Oh, wow. And going back to it now, everybody, notice the Chianti Classico, the VA is coming up, that balsamic vinegar note, and the wine's really quite earthy. This wine, not so much. But what there is in place of earth, there's definitely oak, okay? This is the first time out of all the wines we've had a wine with noticeable oak, and some of it's new. And I would describe it as really pretty spicy. So there's vanilla and baking spices. There's bitter chocolate in there, and almost like cola. It's cola nut. Okay. All right. So we're going to get back to that because it has to do with some of the comments here. Everybody, once you taste it, please. Oh my goodness, that's tasty. Don't you think? The alcohol. I feel it down there. Okay. I want to taste it again. Please do. All right. So I would say the trend of fruit from nose to the palate holds true. However, we still have raisins and prunes. We have craisins, the dried cranberries you give your kids in the school lunch. We've got like dried cherries, like liqueured cherries. And liqueur is really true because the alcohol, I'm feeling it like right here. The alcohol is high. It's at least 15%. And what else about it? But the wine's got acid. Okay. And that makes me think that the wine was acidulated. But there's also one more thing. It's really ripe. We've got the herbs. Black pepper is stronger in the palate than it was on the nose. But the wine is a little bitter. It tastes like black licorice on the finish. There's a reason why, and I'll tell you in a second. The oak on is very spicy. Okay, so it's vanilla spice. It's like cola nut, and yes, I would say a little coconut, Maria, and maybe bacon, not beacon. Okay, and we'll talk about why. The finish is long. I would say the complexity is medium plus, and I don't know about you, but this wine is delicious, right? It's like a well-mannered frat party that is almost out of control, okay? But not quite, all right? All right, so here are your choices. You got Barbera, and they can be pretty rich wines with acid as well. We've got Zinfandel, and then we've got Grenache blend. So your choices for a place would be Italy for the Barbera, France for the Grenache blend, of course, and California for all three, and Australia for all three. But Australia probably for the Grenache blend because they do a lot of GSMs, which are like, Chateauneuf du Pape. In California for all three. Okay, so everybody vote. Okay.
We don't have
So
a lot of
Amanda
time,
likes the
so
pickle and the cola. I agree.
yeah.
And I don't know about you. This is comfort food wine. We're going to talk about it when we reveal. But this is, yeah.
I'm gonna close the poll in 10 seconds because we gotta move. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We haven't quite gotten to 90% yet. So let's get there,
Wow.
people.
All right. So good. Everybody went to Zinfandel. Okay. Some people on Barbera, Grenache blend. Zinfandel Zinfandel and Syrah are the two grapes that you find in exams that the grapes don't ripen evenly. So you have really tart, even green shot berries and raisins on the same cluster of grapes. And if you don't do some serious green harvesting, the range of fruit that you have in one glass of wine is extreme. And a lack of earth and mineral would take you to California or out of Europe. But let's see what we got.
Right. Here we go.
All right, now we have to do an overnight flight. Okay.
Tim, it was probably unnerving for some of our folks who are used to our webinars to have 4 old worlds right from the
Oh,
get-go.
I know.
So don't be looking for clues on how we select,
Yeah, how we set up the flights. That's not going to help you. Okay, so we're leaving Europe. We're flying back across the pond, and we're going to California, and we're going to Sonoma County. Really the epicenter for Zinfandel because that's probably in the US. Actually, it showed up, believe it or not, it was originally, well, it was Croatian, right? We have, certain biotypes of Zinfandel, but we think it was Croatian. Plavac Mali and what it says, Serlina Kostelansky, I think are the two. And there's actually a third, and I can't remember it, but those grapes are in the immediate genetic family of Zinfandel. It made its way to Vienna, and from Vienna to Long Island in 1820. Some guy named Henry Gibb imported it. And then we think Augustin Haraszthy, that crazy Hungarian guy, he brought it to California in the 1860s, okay? But Zinfandel, it was one of the favorites of Italian immigrants who went to Sonoma County in the 1860s to the 80s because they planted, all their crops in better soils, and in the places that were sandy where nothing else would grow, they planted wine grapes, especially Zinfandel. And then phylloxera comes along, and phylloxera does not like sand, and lo and behold, we have all these century plus old Zinfandel vines, and that's why. Segasio was certainly one of the great families. They planted their home vineyard in 1895. I've known these wines for as long as I've had a career in wine. Put them on wine list in the 1980s. They make 9 different Zinfandels. Again, the home ranch from really old vines. This is a collection. This is made on a lot of different plots of old vines from 50 years old up to a century. This is Andy Robinson, the winemaker. And I will say one thing that if you go to the website, and I know this because I did 2 road shows. It's funny, Lee Meng with Evan, with the Crimson Wine Group in 2013 and 14, and Ted
Right.
Segasio. And Segasio was one of the wineries, so I got to know Ted. He just wanted to talk baseball, by the way. He didn't want to talk. But anyway,
That's
the
a
thing
geyser,
about
yeah.
the Sagezos infidels, they all have Petite Syrah in them. And that bitterness on the finish, everybody, if you taste it and the finish is like black licorice, it's because this particular Zinfandel is 11% Petite Syrah, which gives it color, more depth of color, but also that bitterness and tannin on the finish, because Zinfandel in and of itself isn't very tannic. Okay.
Mm.
All right. So, and there's
So was
Andy.
this
These
the,
wines are
sorry, was this the
delicious.
pickle bacon thing too that
Uh,
you?
that's American oak.
Mm.
Ta-da. Okay, those are markers for American oak.
Oh, wow.
And speaking of
Really
bacon,
nice.
I would have this with bacon wrapped meatloaf. That's what I would have it with. Okay. Okay. And actually, we made that a few weeks ago. It was incredible, but in terms of cardiovascular health, maybe only once in a while. Okay. But
I
I
was
take a
gonna say
step.
that's decadent.
Yeah, it
Bacon
is.
wrapped
And
meatloaf.
not only that, the recipe said you were supposed to deep fry the leftovers, and we did not do that. I just want you to know.
All
Yeah.
right.
Okay, let's get to wine number 6. Now for something different. Okay, we're going to talk about structure very briefly first. Okay, so again, this is something that takes practice, structural elements, and also finding out if you're sensitive to acid, alcohol, or tannin. That's important because if you are, you have to make compensations for it. Like my wife, Carla, who loves acidity, there's no such thing as high acid. There's a photograph of her at age 4 drinking the salad dressing out of a bowl. Okay, so there are people like that. All right, go on to the next one. Next slide, please. So you got to connect the dots. If a wine has high acid, obvious, could be cool climate, high acid grape, or just not very ripe when they picked it. Versus the opposite, Zinfandel, yeah, Sonoma County, warm place. Grapes got really ripe, even raisinated, and you have high alcohol, right? And then connect the dots to the structure in the places where the grapes could have been grown. That's part of cause and effect. Okay, next slide. So we're going to do these very quickly, one by one. So acid doesn't smell like anything, but what you smell is you smell tart fruit. And this is tartaric acid. That's the most important acid out of the 4 in any wine. So acid tastes sour, meaning you've got sour fruit, underripe fruit, but then it makes you salivate like all 3 white wines and the Chianti Classico. So that's how you check for it. And certainly you can adjust acid, because I tell you what, I think the Zinfandel was acidulated because it had medium plus acid and it had resinated fruit. Alcohol is next, and I'll start from the bottom, work up. You check for it by tasting the wine, spitting it out or swallowing it and saying, oh, and inhale, and then gauging the warmth. Then, because the Zinfandel I was feeling down here and on high alcohol, and it is 15% on the bottle, by the way. But high alcohol will give you a richer texture in the wine because of more glycerin. It doesn't taste like anything in and of itself, but alcohol you equate to really ripe and raisinated fruit and less acid. And it doesn't smell like anything. You feel it as heat in your nose, but that's really about it. Okay. Next up is phenolic bitterness. And we have 3 good examples of semi-aromatic grapes. It comes from the skins, phenol compounds, and juice in contact leaches some of that out. And you get a little bit of bitterness and astringency on the palate. And it's like a preservative like tannin. How to check for it? Pay attention to the finish. And then finally, tannins, which are in they're phenols, right? And we get them from the grape skins, but we also get them from the barrels that the wines are aged in. They don't smell like anything, but if you see a really deeply colored red wine with really ripe fruit, it's going to have tannin, okay? And notice on the Chianti Classico where I talked about grape tannins in the front of the mouth, oak tannins in the back, okay? All right, and let's get to wine number 6, everybody. This wine, quite a bit of depth of color, although I don't think this is Malbec or Cabernet, but it is close. It's a very deep ruby. The rim is a lighter version of ruby. It's kind of like a pink, but there's also a little garnet in it. So it's a grape that either oxidizes soon or it's got some age. We'll find out. In terms of the legs tiers, well, they're high. They're not this Zinfandel, but most of my glass is coming down and the tiers are thick and they're taking their time. Okay? All right, let's smell it. Okay, talk about different. All right, this is really different. Many things are going on. First of all, like the Zinfandel, there's a mix of different kinds of fruit. There is ripe, stewed, and even tart fruit. And then there is ripe, tart, and stewed black fruit. And there's a little raisinated fruit. But we've got, cherries, mostly plums, cranberries, and blackberries, but it's all ripe, stewed. A little bit of it is tart, but mostly, the ripe and stewed part. A little raisinated fruit, but not like the Zinfandel. So the grapes aren't that ripe. What there is like the Zinfandel, there's black pepper here. But here, what's different about it, it smells like garrigue. It smells like lavender. It smells like herb de Provence. It smells like what Madeline calls the Jimmy Dean factor. So there is sanguine, like dry blood, and even like soy sauce, or it's like raw steak on a cutting board. Okay. But it's very herbal too. And it smells like black olives, and it almost smells like tapenade. It smells very Mediterranean. And
Wow, Maria, you really nailed that black olive right there.
yeah, way to go. And what else about it? It's earthy. There's mushroom and tern soil, and then it's stony, minerally at the same time. There's oak here, but notice if you smell the Zinfandel in comparison, the Zinfandel was done, in a mix of used and new French oak barrels. Sorry, not French, they were American barrels. This, on the other hand, is more textural. It's almost like smoke and toast and really, cocoa powder and coffee maybe, but it's not spicy.
Mhm.
And Maria's saying little Brett for you. It's a little what I call corrupt, Maria. So there could be a little Brett. Okay. All right. But I don't find it offensive. I actually like it. Everybody taste it, please. Mm. And then Leslie, good call on the beef jerky. Absolutely. Oh man, is that different? First of all, I'm working backwards for the sake of time. Alcohol, high alcohol, but not high alcohol frat party that we just had. Okay. And then the acid, there's more acid here, but it doesn't feel acidulated. So whatever this is, the grapes, they have elevated acidity and yet manage to, keep the acidity, I should say, with the ripeness. And then all the pepper, the olives, the tapenade, the garrigue, the, herb de Provence, it's meaty, it's savory. Now, who said that? Maria said a little bit of Brettanomyces. Yeah, there's even more in the palate. It's got a little bit of a metallic finish and earthy and minerally. And then the oak is in the back, the structure. And it's really grainy. The tannins are really grainy. That reminds me of the tannins of certain grapes, but also used oak. Okay. All right. That's a lot. The alcohol is high, the acid's medium plus, the tannins are medium plus, and the finish is long, and this wine is complex. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to launch this poll. Folks should be seeing it on the screen.
We're actually kind of moving out of a season where I would drink this wine. It reminds me of a winter wine. Okay. Your choices are Grenache Blend, Zinfandel, just had it. Malbec and Blend, possible. So Spain could be Garnacha. Remember, it is originally a Spanish grape. Lots of places in Spain grow it and make it. France for the Grenache Blend, and also Malbec because of Cahors and Gascony. Argentina for Malbec, and then California for, well, all three. Okay. So take a vote, see what we have. I'm going to take another taste. You might taste the Zinfandel next to this because the Zinfandel, by comparison, the tannins are like Hello Kitty, right? They're really soft and they're nice. And even though it's really high alcohol.
I really hope everyone's got 6 glasses in front of them. I mean, that's one of the brilliance of being able to taste things in a flight. You'll hear Tim or any of our speakers go back and forth a lot.
Yeah.
And like that, I think is a huge part of the learning process to
And
compare.
everybody, when you go back, now you go back to the Zinfandel and you really taste the American oak. It tastes like bourbon, the finish. Yeah. So, whoever called the bacon and the dill pickle, yeah, nailed it. Way to go. All right, everybody, we got Grenache Blend, but also Malbec Blend. Some people in Spain, some people in France, 56%, and some in Argentina. Okay. All right. Let's see what we have, Li Meng.
All right.
Okay, we're going to hop the plane. Guess what? We got to go right back across the pond. Okay. So we're going to go to France and we're going to go to the Southern Rhone. And we're going to go to about a 30-minute drive outside of Avignon. Not Chateauneuf-du-Pape, but we're going to go to Gigondas. And so that's another famous appellation for Grenache blend wines in the Southern Rhone. And small producer, Domaine de Terme. And this is Grenache. And well, I would say it's 80% Grenache, 20% Syrah. If you know anything about wine laws for Gigondas, that's the law. Maximum 80% Grenache. And small producer, but they also make wines from Chateauneuf, from Sablaise, from where else? Vacqueyras. And they make, yeah, really good wines. They make a delicious rosé too, you know.
Mhm.
And so here we are. We are in in Gigondas, which is right next to Vacqueyras, a little higher in elevation than Chateauneuf-du-Pape, which is like valley floor. But Grenache blend. This wine is indigenous ferment. It's done in stainless steel originally. Then it goes into 500-liter barrels for 12 months. And then it's bottled and it's delicious. Yeah, but to me, this is like quintessential winter wine. I think about something like this with a braise or stew. They think of it with cassoulet, which is a typical winter. Again, yeah, it's kind of like Bandol. It's except for the fact that there's too many things going on for a single grape variety. And there's Anne-Marie Godin, the winemaker, really talented. And yeah, this is just delicious wine. The thing I like about Gigondas that I can't say about Chateauneuf-du-Pape is, the last 10 years, prices for Chateauneuf-du-Pape have tripled, not doubled, tripled. And
Mhm.
so Gigondas, many of them are good in the same league in terms of quality, and they are still affordable.
Mhm.
Um, Maria has a good
Tim,
point. Mourvedre is more funky. It is. Yeah, Mourvedre is more tannic and it's usually reductive, meaning it's a little stinky. But that is to say Mourvedre from France and not Monastrell from Spain, because same grape and they make it a different way. And frankly, in some ways, they do better with it, especially with the tannin management.
Mhm.
Okay.
Tim, just because there were 20% of people who picked Malbec,
Yeah.
how is
Okay.
it not a Malbec?
That's a great question. So yeah, the depth of color in here, think about it. Malbec is one of the Cabernet Sauvignon family grapes, right? We would expect pyrazines. Malbec probably less than any of the others, right? But purple. Malbec is purple in color. Even the rim is purple. It's Cabernet fruit, so it's black cherry and cassis and blackberry and black plum, and also some tart fruit too. But it has pyrazines, and so all this savory stuff and the black pepper we were talking about, MIA, it's just not there. Yeah. So big difference. Yeah. Okay.
So,
There's the book.
yeah, we got to the book. I just wanted to shout out, this is an amazing amount of information. Tim does a great job. We were almost at 90 minutes and we
Yeah.
went a little over, but the amount of information coming at you, of course, you'll find it all in the book. So, Ivan,
Yeah.
get the book if you don't already have it.
Yeah.
And I think someone else said it earlier, Amanda did. Subscribe to Tim's Substack because it's funny and it's
Yeah.
great.
So the blog is for wine related things and the Substack is for everything else. I write every day, right? This is my office. I come in here, it's 7:30 in the morning and I answer email, I fill out a daily journal, and then I spend the next 2 hours writing. So I'll write a 1,000-word essay every day that I can. And a lot of them are funny and snarky, and you can already see my sense of humor is a little warped. So that's where that ends up. Those of you that have this tasting book, please, shameless request, go on and leave in a review on Amazon. It really means a lot to authors. If you could do that, I would really appreciate it.
Great. And of course, if you haven't already, I want to introduce Tim's new book.
New book. Yep.
Yep. Tim, you want to say a few words about it?
Yeah, so this is all the stories from my days in the restaurant business and also selling wine. And a lot of them are funny. I mean, the two worst shower experiences I ever had, the 4 times in a car on a wine trip where I thought I was going to die. My first job bussing tables in a pancake house in Albuquerque from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. Yeah, bartending in a restaurant in San Francisco with a really bad rat problem. I mean, it's all in there, and they're short and they're funny and they're, yeah, good stuff. So check it
Great.
out.
I want to just put a shout out for our next webinar. For those of you who are here for the first time, thank you so much for being here. For those of you who miss Madeline Trefon, she is going to be back on April 18th. And we're going to actually have a new guest that day. It's going to be Peter Granoff from the Ferry Plaza Wine Merchant. It's an independent retail store here in the Bay Area. And he's made 6 selections, including a wine that he co-made with us here at Master the World.